Oh no, did I scare you? Preston Caldwell's voice trembles with urgency as he stands frozen in the doorway, his eyes locked with Umber and Kosi's in a fleeting, electrifying moment. Her, half-dressed in Zenith Corp's private media room. Him, the millionaire CEO who never meant to intrude. Welcome, listeners, from New York to Nairobi, from London to Lagos. Where are you tuning in from? Share in the comments and let us know. What do you think happens next in this charged encounter? Will it spark a scandal or something deeper? Picture Umber, a bold black woman on her third day at a corporate giant, and Preston, a man haunted by his past, caught in a moment that could change everything. Subscribe to our channel for the latest chapters of this unfolding drama and join us to uncover the secrets, passion, and power that await. The Manhattan skyline glittered like a constellation of ambition, its glass towers piercing the dawn as Umber and Kosi stepped out of the subway, her heels clicking against the pavement. The air buzzed with the city's restless energy, a pulse that matched the thrum of her heart. It was her third day at Zenith Corp, a corporate titan that seemed to hold the world in its sleek, minimalist grip. Umber, a black woman with braids woven tight and a fire in her chest, had clawed her way from a cramped Brooklyn apartment to this moment. The weight of it all, the skyscraper looming above, the promise of a paycheck, the chance to prove herself, pressed against her ribs. "Don't mess this up," she whispered, her breath fogging in the crisp morning air. Her reflection flickered in a shop window, sharp in a navy blouse and pencil skirt, her eyes gleaming with resolve. Inside Zenith's headquarters, the lobby was a cathedral of ambition. Marble floors gleamed under soft LED lights, and a living wall of greenery climbed toward a glass ceiling that seemed to touch the heavens. Umber's pass swiped her through security, the beep a small victory. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like a rocket launch, each ding ratcheting up her nerves. She'd spent years sketching designs in a community college art room, stitching dreams into reality with nothing but grit and a second-hand sewing machine. Now she was here, an assistant in the heart of one of New York's most powerful corporations. The doors slid open, revealing an open-concept office that screamed wealth. Black leather chairs, polished desks, and a quiet so profound it felt like a held breath. Umber's desk sat just outside the CEO's office, a glass-walled fortress that radiated authority. Preston Caldwell's nameplate gleamed, a silent reminder of the man who ran this empire. She'd only glimpsed him in passing, a tall figure in a charcoal suit, green eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Her job was simple: manage his schedule, organize files, and stay invisible. But invisibility wasn't in Umber's blood. She carried the weight of her grandmother's stories, tales of resilience woven through generations, and the stubborn pride of a woman who'd fought to be seen. Today, she'd organized a stack of reports left in chaos by her predecessor, her fingers flying over the keyboard with a rhythm that felt like defiance. The morning blurred into a frenzy of emails and phone calls, the office humming with the low chatter of executives. Umber moved with precision, her smile a shield, her notepad a sword. But disaster struck in the break room. A junior analyst juggling a tray of coffee cups stumbled, and a scalding latte splashed across Umber's blouse. The stain bloomed like a bruise, dark and unforgiving, soaking through to her skin. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," the analyst stammered, but Umber waved him off, her jaw tight. "It's fine," she said, though her pulse spiked. She couldn't face the day looking like a coffee-stained rookie. She needed a fix, fast. She remembered the private media room from orientation, a tucked-away space used for press shoots, now supposedly dormant. It was her only shot. Grabbing a crisp white dress from her bag, a backup she'd packed for emergencies, she slipped down the hallway, her heels muffled on the plush carpet. The office was quieter now, most of the team at lunch or buried in meetings. The media room's door clicked shut behind her, sealing her in a cocoon of soft light and mirrored walls. A white velvet chaise lounged in one corner. A clothes rack stood empty against another. It felt like a sanctuary, a place to steal a moment and reclaim her armor. Umber unzipped her stained blouse, letting it fall to the floor, the cool air brushing her skin. She reached for the white dress, its fabric smooth under her fingers, a design she'd sewn herself, clean lines with a hint of her heritage in its subtle beadwork. She slipped one arm through a sleeve, her movements quick but deliberate, her mind already racing back to her desk. The mirror caught her reflection, braids framing her face, eyes fierce despite the morning's chaos. She was umbered and cozy, and a spilled coffee wouldn't break her. The room's quiet was a balm, the hum of the city a distant murmur through the walls. She adjusted the dress, smoothing it over her hips, feeling the fabric hug her curves like a promise. This was her moment to reset, to walk back into that office with her head high. She'd spent too long fighting for this chance. Nights studying, days hustling, her grandmother's voice echoing, "You're stronger than you know." Umber exhaled, tying the dress's belt, her fingers steady. She was ready to face the rest of the day, to prove she belonged in this world of glass and power. But the air shifted, a faint creak breaking the silence. Umber's heart lurched. She turned, half expecting an empty room, but the door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling in. Someone was there. Her breath caught, her body tensing as she reached for her blouse, instincts screaming to cover herself. The moment hung, fragile and electric, a heartbeat away from collision. She didn't know it yet, but this was the edge of something unstoppable, a spark that would ignite her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The door creaked open, a sliver of harsh office light slicing through the soft glow of the media room. Umber and Kosi froze, her white dress half on, one sleeve dangling as her bare shoulder caught the air. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a wild drumbeat that drowned out the city's hum. Standing in the doorway was Preston Caldwell, Zenith Corp's CEO, his tailored charcoal suit framing a silhouette that seemed to command the very walls. His green eyes, sharp as jade, widened for a fleeting second, locking onto hers. Time stretched, a breathless eternity compacted into two heartbeats. Then, as if jolted by an electric current, he stepped back, the door clicking shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in Umber's ears. Silence crashed in, heavy and suffocating. She stood rooted, her fingers clutching the dress's fabric, her face burning so fiercely she thought it might ignite. The mirror reflected her shock, braids framing wide eyes, her breath shallow, her body caught in a moment she hadn't prepared for. How did this happen? Her mind raced, replaying the seconds. Why hadn't she locked the door? Why hadn't he knocked? The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, its mirrored walls throwing her vulnerability back at her. She yanked the dress into place, tying the belt with trembling hands, her movements jerky but deliberate. She was Umber Nkosi, daughter of immigrants, weaver of dreams, survivor of countless battles. She would not unravel over this, but her pulse wouldn't slow, each beat a reminder of Preston's eyes, that fleeting flicker of something. Surprise, yes, but something else too. Not judgment, not disdain, but a spark she couldn't name. She pressed her palms to her cheeks, willing the heat to fade. She had to face him. She couldn't hide in this room forever, not when her desk waited, piled with reports that demanded her focus. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed her dress one last time, her reflection now a warrior's, chin high, eyes fierce. She grabbed her stained blouse, stuffed it into her bag, and pushed the door open, stepping back into the sleek, sterile world of Zenith Corp. The hallway was empty, the office quieter now, the lunch rush fading into the hum of distant keyboards. Umber's heels clicked against the marble floor, each step a declaration of control. She reached her desk, her heart still racing, and glanced at the glass wall of Preston's office. The door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out, inviting and ominous. She couldn't avoid this. If she didn't address it now, the moment would fester, a shadow over her every move. She squared her shoulders, grabbed her notebook like a shield, and knocked lightly on the glass. "Come in," came his voice, low and composed, as if nothing had happened. Umber stepped inside, the air cooler in his office, the city sprawling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Preston stood by the glass, his back to her, his white shirt crisp, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that spoke of strength beneath the polish. The skyline framed him like a king surveying his realm, but when he turned, his face was unreadable, a mask of corporate calm. Umber's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry about earlier," she said, clutching her notebook to her chest. "I thought the media room was empty. I shouldn't have assumed." He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "It was my mistake, Miss Nkosi," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "I should have knocked. You assumed correctly. The room's rarely used. I only went in for a tablet I'd left behind." He paused, his gaze softening, just enough to unsettle her. "You handled it with remarkable poise." The words hung between them, heavy with something unspoken, like a current rippling beneath the still water. Umber blinked, caught off guard. Poise? She'd felt like a deer in headlights, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he'd heard it. I, I'm used to keeping it together," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. His lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile, and for a moment the room felt smaller, the air charged. "Most would have screamed," he said, his tone lighter now, almost teasing. "You just looked startled, then composed. That's rare." His eyes held hers and she saw it again. That flicker, not of pity or power, but of something warmer, something that made her skin prickle. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening on the notebook. "Maybe I'm just used to chaos," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips, a shield to keep the tension at bay. Preston tilted his head, studying her, and the silence stretched, thick with possibility. He stepped closer, just one step, but it was enough to make her pulse spike again. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice lower now, sincere. "I want to be clear about that." Umber met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I know," she said softly, her words steady despite the storm in her chest. Another pause, heavy and electric. His eyes lingered on her, not on her dress or her braids, but on her, as if seeing something deeper than the assistant who'd spilled coffee and stumbled into his path. Umber felt it, a shift, a crack in the polished facade of Zenith Corp, a moment that wasn't in the employee handbook. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, breaking the silence, her voice crisp to anchor herself. He cleared his throat, stepping back, the spell breaking. "No, that's all, Miss Nkosi. Thank you." She nodded, turning to leave, her steps measured, though her insides trembled like a taut wire. The glass door closed behind her, and she sank into her chair, her heart still racing. The office hummed around her, oblivious to the collision that had just occurred. She opened her notebook, her pen hovering, but her mind was elsewhere, on those green eyes, that fleeting spark, and the question of what it meant. She was Umber Nkosi, and she'd faced worse than an awkward moment. But as she stared at the reports, one thought lingered. Preston Caldwell had seen her, truly seen her, and that was more dangerous than any spilled coffee. Umber Nkosi's heels clicked against the hardwood floor of her Brooklyn apartment, the sound sharp in the evening quiet. The city's pulse thrummed faintly through the open window, a distant siren weaving into the hum of traffic. She dropped her bag by the door, the weight of the day, reports, emails, and that searing moment in the media room still clinging to her like damp fabric. Her heart hadn't settled since Preston Caldwell's eyes met hers, his words, remarkable poise, echoing in her mind like a melody she couldn't shake. She kicked off her shoes, her braids swaying as she moved to the kitchen, where the scent of jasmine tea lingered from morning. The apartment, small but vibrant with thrifted art and woven throws, felt like a refuge, a place to untangle the chaos of Zenith Corp. Zara, her roommate, sprawled across the couch, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn balanced on her stomach. Her eyes lit up as Umber sank into a chair, exhaustion etched into her frame. "Girl, you look like you've been through a war," Zara said, sitting up, her locks bouncing. "What happened? Spill." Umber exhaled, a laugh caught in her throat, and recounted the incident. The coffee stain, the media room, Preston's unexpected entrance, and the way his gaze had held hers. Not with judgment, but with something electric. "He saw me half-dressed, Zara," she said, her voice low, almost disbelieving. "And then he just left. But he said I handled it with poise." "Poise." She shook her head, her fingers tracing the edge of the chair. Zara's laugh was a burst of sunlight, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Hold up. Your millionaire CEO boss caught you changing, and he's out here giving TED Talk compliments? Umber, this is either a lawsuit waiting to happen or the start of a love story for the ages. She leaned forward, popcorn forgotten. So, what was the vibe? Creepy? Arrogant? Umber paused, her brow furrowing. That's the thing. It wasn't creepy. He was respectful. Left right away. But when we talked after, in his office, he looked at me differently. Not like I'm just the assistant who schedules his meetings. Like I'm someone. Her voice softened, almost a whisper, as if saying it aloud might break the spell. Zara whistled low, her grin widening. Oh, this is gonna be good. You've got a CEO with hard eyes, and you're out here acting like it's just another Tuesday. What's his deal? You think he's playing you? Umber leaned back, her gaze drifting to the ceiling, where a crack shaped like a river ran through the plaster. I don't know, she admitted. He's Preston Caldwell, built Zenith from nothing, runs it like a machine. He's not supposed to notice me. But the way he said poise, it wasn't just a word. It felt like he saw me, Zara. Saw me. Her fingers tightened around the chair's arm, grounding her against the flutter in her chest. The room fell quiet, the city's hum filling the space. Zara tilted her head, studying Umber with the intensity of a sister. Okay, but you're not some damsel waiting for a prince. You've got dreams bigger than his skyscraper. So what's your move? Umber's lips curved, a spark of defiance lighting her eyes. My move is to keep being me. I didn't fight my way from community college to Zenith to let one awkward moment derail me. I'm here to work, to build something. If he sees me, fine, but I'm not chasing his approval. Her voice was steady, a vow to herself, etched in the air like ink. Zara raised her glass of iced tea in a mock toast. That's my girl, but I'm calling it now. This is the plot of a Netflix movie, and I'm here for it. Umber laughed, the sound loosening the knot in her chest. She stood, moving to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water, her reflection catching in the window. The woman staring back was fierce, unyielding, her braids a crown, her eyes alight with purpose. She'd spent years proving herself to teachers who doubted her, to bosses who overlooked her, to a world that tried to dim her shine. Preston Caldwell's gaze, no matter how piercing, wouldn't change that. Yet as she sipped her water, her mind wandered back to his office. The way he'd stood by the window, the city at his feet, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a man beneath the CEO's armor. His voice, low and deliberate, had carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Most would have screamed, he'd said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't just flattery, it was recognition, as if he'd seen the fire she carried and respected it. Umber set her glass down, her fingers lingering on the cool surface. She wasn't naive. Men like Preston didn't climb to the top without calculation, and she'd heard the whispers about his past, a messy divorce, tabloid headlines, a heart locked behind steel walls. But that look in his eyes wasn't a strategy. It was something raw, unguarded, and it stirred a question she wasn't ready to answer. What did he see in her? She shook her head, pushing the thought away. The apartment, exceptional. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and stories with Zara, but Umber's mind kept drifting back to that moment. She climbed into bed, the city's glow filtering through her curtains, and stared at the ceiling. Poise, he'd said. The word felt like a key, unlocking something she wasn't sure she wanted to face. She closed her eyes, willing sleep to come, but Preston's face lingered. Those green eyes, that flicker of warmth. She wasn't chasing him, she told herself. She was Umber and Kosi, and her dreams were bigger than a fleeting glance. But as sleep pulled her under, a spark lingered in her chest, small but undeniable, threatening to ignite. Preston Caldwell stood alone on the balcony of his Manhattan penthouse, the city sprawling below like a map of his conquests. The skyline shimmered, headlights weaving through the streets like veins of molten gold, but his gaze was distant, fixed on a horizon only he could see. A glass of whiskey rested in his hand, the amber liquid catching the faint glow of the penthouse's muted lights. The air was cool, carrying the sharp edge of a city that never slept, yet his mind was anchored to a single moment. Umber Nkosi, half-dressed in the media room, her eyes meeting his with a fire that hadn't flinched. Her image burned in his thoughts, vivid and unrelenting, a spark that refused to fade. He leaned against the railing, the glass cold against his palm. Preston wasn't a man who lingered on moments. He'd built Zenith Corp from a fledgling startup to a corporate titan with ruthless precision, each decision calculated, each risk weighed. Emotions were liabilities, distractions he'd learned to bury after his divorce. A public unraveling that cost him millions and left his name smeared across tabloids. His ex-wife, Elise, had called him cold, a machine in a suit, and she hadn't been wrong. He'd sworn off entanglements, especially with anyone tied to his company. Workplace relationships were a minefield, a lesson etched in betrayal and headlines. Yet Umbert and Kosi had slipped past his defenses, a single glance rewriting rules he'd carved in stone. Her poise haunted him, not just the way she'd stood there, vulnerable yet unshaken, but the way she'd faced him afterward in his office, her voice steady, her eyes unflinching. "I'm used to keeping it together," she'd said, and he'd believed her. There was a strength in her, a quiet ferocity that reminded him of the city itself, unyielding, alive, impossible to ignore. He took a sip of whiskey, the burn grounding him, but her face lingered, braids framing her jaw, her skin catching the soft light, her gaze holding his like a challenge. He'd seen assistants crumble under less pressure, their nerves fraying at a missed email or a sharp word. Umber was different. She didn't shrink. She burned. Preston turned, stepping back into the penthouse, its minimalist expanse a mirror of his control. White walls, black furniture, art chosen for prestige, not passion. He set the glass on a marble counter, the clink echoing in the silence. His reflection caught in a glass panel, revealing a man who looked untouchable. Sharp jaw, green eyes that could silence a boardroom, a suit tailored to perfection even at this late hour. But beneath it, he felt a crack, a fault line widening with every thought of her. He'd spent years building walls, each brick a lesson in detachment. Elise's betrayal had taught him that love was a luxury he couldn't afford, a weakness that invited chaos. Yet Umber's presence was a quiet rebellion against that truth. He crossed to his desk, where a tablet lay open, displaying a report he'd barely skimmed. His mind wasn't on numbers tonight. It was on her, on the way she'd clutched her notebook like a shield, her words measured but laced with fire. "Maybe I'm just used to chaos," she'd said, a faint smile softening her edges. That smile had caught him off guard, a glimpse of warmth beneath her armor. He'd wanted to say more, to tell her how rare it was to see someone stand so tall in a moment that would have broken others. But he'd held back, his CEO instincts reining him in. He couldn't afford to blur lines, not when Zenith was his empire, his legacy. Still, the memory of her refused to fade. He sank into a leather chair, his fingers drumming against the armrest. He'd seen her work in passing, sketches left on a printer, designs from a Brooklyn community project she'd mentioned in her interview. They were bold, vibrant, rooted in something deeper than trends. She wasn't just an assistant, she was a creator, her talent a quiet force that demanded to be seen. Preston rubbed his temple, a rare admission of conflict. He wanted to elevate her, to give her a platform, but the impulse felt tangled with something personal, something dangerous. Was it her talent drawing him in, or the way she looked at him, unafraid, as if she could see through his polished exterior? The city's hum filtered through the open balcony door, a reminder of the world he'd conquered. He'd faced hostile takeovers, boardroom betrayals, and paparazzi vultures, emerging each time stronger, sharper. But Umber Nkosi was a different kind of challenge. She wasn't a rival to outmaneuver or a deal to close. She was a woman who'd stood bare and unbowed, her strength a mirror to his own guarded heart. He stood, pacing to the window, the skyline a glittering distraction. He'd told her he didn't mean to make her uncomfortable, and he'd meant it, but he hadn't admitted the truth. That moment in the media room had shaken him, not because of what he'd seen, but because of who he'd seen. A woman who didn't need his approval, yet commanded his attention. Preston's phone buzzed. A late-night email from a board member, but he ignored it. He wasn't ready to return to the world of spreadsheets and strategies. Instead, he poured another finger of whiskey, the liquid catching the light like a warning. He couldn't afford to want her, not when his past had taught him the cost of letting someone close. But as he stood there, the city at his feet, he couldn't shake the feeling that Umber Nkosi was more than a moment. She was a spark, and he was dangerously close to letting it ignite. Umber Nkosi sat at her desk, the hum of Zenith Corp's open-plan office a steady pulse around her. The morning light streamed through the glass walls, casting sharp angles across her neatly organized files. Her braids were pinned high, her burgundy blazer a bold contrast to the monochrome elegance of the 42nd floor. She typed with precision, scheduling Preston Caldwell's week with the efficiency that had earned her this role. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a current of unease rippled. The memory of their encounter in the media room lingered like a half-remembered dream. His words, remarkable poise, etched into her thoughts. She pushed it aside, focusing on the screen, determined to keep her place in this world of glass and ambition. She was Umber Nkosi, and she'd fought too hard to let a fleeting glance unsettle her. The intercom buzzed, a sharp interruption. "Ms. Nkosi, please see me in my office." Preston's voice crackled through, low and commanding. Umber's heart gave a traitor's lurch, but she smoothed her expression, grabbing her notebook as she stood. The hallway to his office felt longer than usual, each step a negotiation with her nerves. She knocked once, the glass door cool under her knuckles. "Come in," he called, his tone as polished as the marble floors. She stepped inside, the air crisp with the scent of leather and cedar. Preston leaned against his desk, his charcoal suit unbuttoned, revealing a white shirt that hugged his frame. His green eyes met hers, steady but unreadable, and for a moment the room felt too small, the city beyond the windows too vast. "Ms. Nkosi," he began, his voice measured, "I've been reviewing your file." He gestured to a tablet on his desk, its screen glowing with documents. "Your designs, the ones from that Brooklyn community project you mentioned in your interview, are exceptional." Umber blinked, her grip tightening on her notebook. She'd included those sketches in her portfolio almost as an afterthought, a nod to her roots, not expecting them to reach the CEO's desk. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but cautious, sensing a shift in the air. Preston straightened, his presence filling the room like a storm gathering strength. "You're wasted as my assistant," he said, his words landing like a spark on dry tinder. "I want you to lead our new sustainable fashion initiative, Horizon Threads. It's eco-focused, community-driven, and I believe your vision could shape it." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Umber's breath caught, her mind racing to catch up. Lead a project? At Zenith Corp? The idea was a wildfire, thrilling and terrifying. She'd spent years sketching in cramped apartments, stitching dreams into fabric with borrowed needles, her grandmother's voice echoing, "Make them see you." But this was a leap she hadn't dared imagine. Her eyes searched Preston's face, looking for the catch. Was this a gesture tied to that moment in the media room? A favor born of guilt or something else? "Why me?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the polished calm of the room. "There are designers with bigger names, more experience. Why an assistant?" Preston's gaze didn't waver. He stepped closer, just one step, but it was enough to make the air crackle. "Because you don't flinch," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "Those sketches aren't just designs. Their stories, bold and unapologetic, are rooted in something real. I've seen what you can do, Umber, and I've seen how you carry yourself. You stood in that room, vulnerable, and you didn't break. That's not just talent, it's strength." His words hit like a pulse, each one striking a chord deep within her. She wanted to believe him, to seize this chance, but doubt gnawed at her. Men like Preston Caldwell didn't offer opportunities without strings, did they? She tilted her chin, her eyes narrowing. "And if this is about what happened in the media room," she asked, her voice steady but laced with steel, "if this is pity or something else?" Preston's expression tightened, a flicker of something, offense perhaps, crossing his face. He leaned back against the desk, creating distance, his hands gripping the edge. "Your job is secure, no matter what you decide," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "This isn't about that moment. It's about your work, your potential. I'm offering you a platform because I believe in it, but the choice is yours." Umber's heart pounded, a drumbeat of possibility and caution. She'd fought her way from a Brooklyn classroom to this office, her dreams stitched into every late night, every rejection. Horizon Threads could be her canvas, a chance to weave her heritage, bold African patterns, sustainable fabrics, into something global. But Preston's gaze, intense and unwavering, stirred a different kind of heat. Was he seeing her talent, or was there more? She couldn't afford to misread this, not when her future hung in the balance. "I'll consider it," she said, her voice calm, though her pulse raced. "I need time to think." Preston nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Not the polished grin of a CEO, but something softer, almost relieved. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But know this, I don't offer what I don't believe in." He stepped back, breaking the tension, and gestured toward the door. "That's all for now, Ms. Nkosi." Umber turned, her steps deliberate, her notebook struck. The weight of it pressed against her, a storm of ambition and caution, but she walked out with her head high, ready to face whatever came next. The grand ballroom of Zenith Corp's annual gala pulsed with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting prisms across a sea of velvet gowns and tailored tuxedos. Umber Nkosi stood at the edge of the crowd, her crimson gown a bold stroke against the monochrome elegance of Manhattan's elite. The dress, her own creation, hugged her curves with a confidence that echoed her African heritage. Intricate beadwork tracing the neckline, a high slit revealing honey-toned legs that moved with purpose. Her braids were swept up, adorned with gold pins that caught the light like tiny suns. She was no longer the assistant who scheduled meetings. Tonight, she was a designer, a featured talent for Horizon Threads, and the weight of that truth made her stand taller, her eyes scanning the room with a fire that refused to dim. The air buzzed with whispered deals and clinking champagne flutes, the city's power players circling like hawks. Umber sipped her sparkling water, her senses sharp, aware of every glance that lingered on her. She'd accepted Preston Caldwell's offer to lead Horizon Threads, pouring her soul into designs that blended sustainability with the vibrant patterns of her grandmother's stories. Tonight, those designs were on display, draped on mannequins that lined the ballroom's edges, drawing gasps from investors and media. But the spotlight felt like a tightrope, and Umber walked it with the grace of someone who'd learned to balance dreams and doubt. A voice cut through the hum, oily and sharp. "Well, well, from assistant to designer?" Victor Lang, a smug executive with slicked-back hair and old money in his smirk, leaned against the champagne table, his eyes raking over her. "Must be nice having the CEO's attention." Umber's smile didn't waver, though her fingers tightened around her glass. "No, Victor," she said, her voice smooth as steel. "It's called talent. You should try it sometime." The words landed like a blade, and the crowd nearby stifled chuckles. Victor's grin faltered, but before he could retort, a shadow loomed at Umber's side. Preston Caldwell stepped forward, his presence a quiet storm. His black tuxedo was sharp, his green eyes colder than the champagne in Victor's hand. "Walk away, Lang," he said, his voice low and lethal, "before you embarrass yourself further." Victor scoffed, muttering something about power trips, and slunk into the crowd, his bravado dissolving. Umber turned to Preston, her pulse quickening. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice steady but her eyes searching his. He met her gaze, unflinching. "I did." The words carried a weight that made the ballroom fade, the chatter and clinks receding into a distant hum. For a moment, it was just them. Umber, radiant in crimson, and Preston, a man whose polished exterior hid a fire she was beginning to recognize. The tension between them crackled, a thread stretched taut, ready to snap. Preston offered his arm, a gesture both formal and intimate. "Walk with me," he said, his voice softer now, almost a request. Umber hesitated, her heart a drumbeat, but she took his arm, her fingers brushing the smooth fabric of his sleeve. They moved through the crowd, heads turning, whispers trailing like smoke. He led her to the rooftop terrace where the city sprawled below, a constellation of lights pulsing like a living thing. The cool air kissed her skin, a relief from the ballroom's heat, but Preston's presence was its own kind of fire. He stopped by the railing, the skyline framing him, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. "You're breathtaking, Umber," he said, his voice low, raw with something that wasn't just admiration. "But I'm trying to be professional." The confession hung between them, fragile and electric. Umber stepped closer, her gown whispering against the stone floor, her eyes locked on his. "Then why does it feel like more?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with a challenge. The air thickened, the city's hum a faint echo. Preston's jaw tightened, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. He stepped toward her, closing the distance, and for a moment she thought he might retreat. Instead, he leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was slow, searing, a release of months of unspoken tension. The world tilted, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. His hands found her waist, gentle but firm, pulling her closer as her fingers curled into his lapel. The kiss was a spark igniting dry wood, a collision of restraint and desire. Umber's heart raced, but she pulled back, breathless, her eyes searching his. "I won't be a fling, Preston," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "I set the terms. This doesn't change who I am or what I'm building." His gaze softened, a rare crack in his armor. "I wouldn't want it to," he said, his voice rough. "You set the pace, Umber. Always." She stepped back, the cool air grounding her, her crimson gown catching the light like a flame. The gala waited below, her designs on display, her future unfolding. But this moment, this kiss, was a turning point she hadn't foreseen. She turned, her heels clicking as she walked back to the ballroom, leaving Preston on the terrace, his silhouette etched against the city. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the certainty that she was no longer just an assistant. She was Umber Nkosi, and whatever came next, she would face it on her terms. The Soho Gallery pulsed with anticipation, its white walls draped in living greenery that framed the runway, like a promise of rebirth. Umber Nkosi stood backstage, her fitted off-shoulder jumpsuit, her design, hugging her frame with unapologetic boldness. The black fabric shimmered with gold threading, a nod to her African heritage woven into modern lines. Her braids were swept into a high bun, her eyes sharp with focus as models buzzed around her, their garments vibrant with her vision for horizon threads. Tonight was the launch, the moment her designs would step into the spotlight, carrying her dreams from a Brooklyn sketchbook to a stage watched by fashion critics, investors, and Zenith Corp's elite. But beneath her steady exterior, a storm churned, doubts fueled by whispers that trailed her like shadows. The gallery hummed with the chatter of New York's fashion vanguard, their champagne flutes clinking as rhythmic drums pulsed through the speakers. Umber adjusted a model's sash, her fingers steady despite the weight of eyes she couldn't see. She'd poured her soul into these designs, eco-friendly fabrics dyed in rich ochres and indigos, cuts that celebrated diverse bodies, patterns that whispered of her grandmother's stories. Each piece was a declaration, a bridge between her roots and the future. But the office gossip had followed her here, sharp and insidious. "She's just the CEO's favorite," a colleague had hissed in the break room. "No real talent, just a pretty face with a lucky break." The words stung, but Umber refused to flinch. She was no stranger to doubt. She'd faced it in classrooms, in interviews, in a world that often tried to dim her light. A makeup artist darted past, brushing powder across a model's cheek. Umber stepped back, scanning the lineup. Every detail had to be perfect. She'd worked with a Harlem seamstress for weeks, stitching late into the night, ensuring each seam was flawless, each bead precise. This wasn't just fashion. It was a legacy, a testament to her resilience. Yet the whispers lingered, a chorus of skepticism that threatened to drown her focus. "Did you hear?" another voice had murmured at Zenith. "She only got horizon threads because of Caldwell's interest." Umber's jaw tightened at the memory. She'd earned this, every thread, every sketch, every sleepless night. Tonight, she'd prove it. The lights dimmed, the drums swelling into a heartbeat that filled the gallery. Umber slipped behind the curtain, her breath steady but her pulse racing. The first model stepped onto the runway, her gown a cascade of emerald and gold, the fabric catching the light like a living flame. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of awe. Umber peered through a gap in the curtain, her heart swelling as the next model followed, her suit sharp and futuristic, its recycled fibers gleaming. The audience leaned forward, phones raised, critics scribbling furiously. Her designs were speaking, loud and unapologetic, drowning out the doubts with every step. But then she saw him, Preston Caldwell, seated in the front row, flanked by investors and press. His midnight black suit hugged his frame, his green eyes fixed on the runway. But Umber felt them searching for her. Their rooftop kiss, a stolen moment of fire and promises, lingered in her veins. But she pushed it aside. This wasn't about him. It was about her. Yet his presence was a magnet, pulling at her focus. She caught a whisper from a nearby assistant. Bet she's only here because of him. Umber's fingers curled into fists, her nails biting into her palms. She wouldn't let their words define her. Umber, a voice called softly. She turned to find Preston standing by the curtain, his expression unreadable under the gallery's soft lights. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, cutting through the backstage chaos. She nodded, her chin lifting. "Better than okay. I'm ready." But the weight of the gossip pressed against her, a challenge she couldn't ignore. "They're talking," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "They think I'm only here because of us." Preston's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "Let them talk," he said. "Your work speaks louder. You're not here because of me. You're here because you're exceptional." His words were a lifeline, but Umber didn't need saving. She needed truth. "I don't want to be the woman you notice because of one moment," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I want to be the woman who earns this, every day, no matter what they say." Preston's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his CEO armor. "You already are," he said, his voice rough with conviction. "You scare me, Umber, not because of what I saw in that room, but because you're real. You challenge me, and I'm not running from it." The crowd's applause erupted, a tidal wave that pulled Umber back to the moment. The final model stepped onto the runway, her dress a bold fusion of Afro-centric patterns and sleek innovation, bringing the audience to their feet. Umber's heart pounded, not with fear, but with triumph. She stepped out from behind the curtain, hesitant at first, but the cheers grew louder, a roar that drowned out the whispers. Camera bulbs flashed, a sea of hands clapped, and she saw Preston, standing, his applause the loudest, his eyes never leaving her. She wasn't just an assistant tonight. She was Umber Nkosi, creator, visionary, unbowed. Backstage, as the models dispersed and the crowd buzzed, Umber stood alone, her jumpsuit gleaming under the lights. The doubts hadn't vanished, but they were quieter now, overshadowed by the applause still ringing in her ears. She'd faced the skeptics, the whispers, and her fears, and she'd won. Her designs had spoken, her talent undeniable. But as she caught Preston's gaze across the room, a new question burned. Could she trust this spark between them, or would it consume the future she was building? For now she stood tall, her victory hard won, her fire brighter than ever. The Brooklyn loft glowed with morning light, its tall windows spilling gold across white marble countertops. Umber Nkosi Caldwell stood at the stove, barefoot, her curls loosely gathered in a messy bun. She wore one of Preston's button-down shirts, the fabric draping over her 6-month pregnant belly, a soft curve that seemed to hold the promise of tomorrow. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla wafted from the sizzling pancakes, mingling with the faint hum of jazz drifting from a speaker in the corner. A sketchbook lay open on the breakfast island, its pages filled with a bridal design, bold yet tender, a reflection of the woman who'd drawn it. Umber flipped a pancake with a practiced flick, her movements steady, her heart full. This loft, this life, was a world she'd never dared imagine. Yet here she was, building it with every breath. The air shifted as Preston Caldwell stepped into the kitchen, his hair tousled from sleep, his bare feet silent on the hardwood. His gray sweatpants hung low, a rare departure from the tailored suits that defined him at Zenith Corp. "I told you I was supposed to cook today," he said, his voice groggy but warm, a smile tugging at his lips. He slid behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, hands resting gently over her bump. His lips brushed her neck, a soft kiss that sent a shiver down her. Umber leaned back, her head resting against his chest. "I got hungry," she teased, her voice light. "So technically, this is self-defense." Preston's chuckle rumbled against her, a sound that felt like home. The loft was their sanctuary, a space carved out from the chaos of their lives. Umber & Cozy Designs, her brand, had soared since its partnership with Zenith, its eco-friendly collections gracing runways from New York to Paris. A scholarship in her name now lifts young black designers, her legacy stretching beyond the sketches she'd once hidden in a Brooklyn drawer. Preston had stood by her, never possessive, always a quiet strength. He'd gifted her a studio in Soho, its lease in her name, a gesture that said he believed in her wings, not a cage. Their marriage, quiet and intimate, had sealed a bond forged in fire. A rooftop kiss, a shared vision, a love that didn't demand but gave. The intercom buzzed, shattering the morning's calm. "Auntie Umber, I brought the fabric you wanted." Jamal's voice crackled through, bright and eager. Umber laughed, her heart lifting. "My studio assistant has arrived," she said, glancing at Preston, who raised an eyebrow. "Do I need to start paying him?" he asked, his tone playful as he moved to the door. "He said pancakes were enough," Umber called back, flipping another golden disc onto a plate. The buzzer sounded again, and Preston let Jamal in, the loft filling with the sound of footsteps and the teenagers' excited chatter about extra swatches and a strawberry smoothie he'd picked up. Umber smiled, her family growing in ways she'd never expected. As she set the table, her gaze fell on the sketchbook, its pages a testament to her journey. She was no longer the assistant who'd stumbled into Zenith, no longer the woman caught changing in a media room. She was Umber & Cozy Caldwell, designer, creator, muse. The world knew her name now, fashion blogs raving about her bold fusion of African heritage and sustainability. Her old neighborhood in Brooklyn celebrated her high school art teacher sending a heartfelt email that brought tears to her eyes. But the whispers had followed too. Colleagues who doubted her, who'd called her rise a product of Preston's favor. She'd silenced them with her work, her designs a roaring answer to their skepticism. Preston returned, carrying a bag of fabric samples Jamal had dropped off. He set it on the counter, his eyes catching hers, soft but intense. "You know," he said, leaning against the island, "sometimes I still think about that day." Umber arched a brow, sliding a plate of pancakes toward him. "The day you walked in on me changing?" she asked, her tone teasing but curious. He grinned, a rare boyish charm breaking through his CEO polish. "That's the one. It was the most unexpected moment of my life, and the best thing that ever happened to me." His voice was low, raw with truth, and Umber felt her heart skip, a familiar spark flaring in her chest. She crossed to him, her bare feet cool against the floor, and rested a hand on his chest. "It was supposed to be my worst moment," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I thought I'd lose everything I'd fought for, but I guess fate had a better idea." Preston's hand covered hers, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I didn't just fall in love with you that day," he said, his green eyes locking onto hers. "I found myself in a way you didn't shrink. You stood tall, Umber, even with nothing to hide behind." She smiled, her heart swelling. "And I saw a man who didn't run from vulnerability, who looked and stayed." Laughter spilled from the stairwell as Jamal bounded in, his arms full of fabric and a smoothie cup sweating in his hand. The loft filled with warmth, the jazz weaving through their voices, the pancakes steaming on the table. Umber glanced at the sketchbook, its back inscribed with a simple note in her handwriting. "Caught in a moment, now forever." This was her legacy, not just the designs, not just the scholarship, but the love that had grown from a spark into a flame that lit their lives. She was Umber & Cozy Caldwell, and with Preston by her side, their child growing within her, she was building a future that shone brighter than any skyline. The Brooklyn loft was a haven of warmth, its tall windows framing a city that glittered like a promise kept. Umber and Cosi Caldwell stood by the breakfast island, her fingers tracing the edges of her sketchbook, its pages alive with designs that had carried her name across oceans. Her 7-month pregnant belly curved beneath a loose silk tunic, her braids cascading over her shoulders, freed from their usual neat bun. The scent of fresh coffee lingered, mingling with the soft jazz that hummed from a speaker. Preston Caldwell moved behind her, his hands gentle as they adjusted a throw blanket over her shoulders, his touch a quiet anchor. Their life, built from a spark in a media room to a love that defied whispers, felt unshakable. Yet as Umber gazed at the skyline, a shadow stirred in her chest, a premonition of a storm she couldn't name. The morning was calm, but the air carried a subtle charge, like the hush before thunder. Umber flipped open her sketchbook, revealing a new collection for Umber and Cosi Designs, set to debut in Paris alongside Zenith Corp's Horizon Threads. Her brand was a beacon now, its sustainable fabrics and bold Afrocentric patterns earning raves from fashion critics. But success came with a price. The whispers that once trailed her at Zenith had grown quieter, drowned by her triumphs, but new voices emerged, sharper, more dangerous. A rival designer, Elena Voss, had risen in the industry, her sleek, minimalist line, a stark contrast to Umber's vibrant vision. Elena's ambition was ruthless, her connections deep, and rumors swirled that she'd set her sights on dismantling Umber's empire. Umber's phone buzzed, a message from her Harlem seamstress. Elena's team is asking about your fabric suppliers. Be careful. Her jaw tightened, her fingers pausing on the sketchbook. She'd faced doubters before, but this felt different. A calculated threat, not just gossip. Elena's name had appeared in industry blogs, her interviews laced with subtle jabs. Sustainability is a trend, but it lacks edge without refinement. Umber knew the subtext. Elena saw her as a flashpoint, a newcomer whose rise threatened her own. The thought sent a chill through her, not for herself, but for the life she and Preston were building. Their unborn child, a fragile promise in a world that could turn cruel. Preston noticed her stillness, his green eyes narrowing as he set his coffee mug down. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low, threaded with concern. He stood beside her, his navy sweater soft against her arm, his presence a steady force. Umber hesitated, her instinct to shield him, warring with the need to share. "Elena Voss," she said finally, her voice steady but edged with steel. "She's digging into my suppliers, trying to undermine me before Paris. It's not just business, Preston. It feels personal." His expression darkened, a flicker of the CEO who'd built Zenith from nothing. "She's threatened by you," he said, his hand resting on hers. "But she doesn't know who she's up against." Umber's lips curved, a spark of defiance igniting, but the weight in her chest didn't lift. Elena wasn't just a rival. She was a ghost from Preston's past. Umber had overheard whispers at a recent Zenith event. Elena had been close to Preston years ago, before his divorce, a confidant who'd left when his marriage crumbled. Now, with Umber's star rising and their marriage a quiet strength, Elena's return felt like a blade poised to strike. Umber turned to Preston, her eyes searching his. "Did you know she was back?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. He exhaled, his hand tightening around hers. "I heard she was making moves in the industry," he admitted, "but I didn't think she'd come for you. For us." The words hung heavy, a crack in their sanctuary. Umber pulled her hand back, not out of anger, but to steady herself. She'd fought too hard, through coffee stains, office gossip, and her own doubts, to let a rival unravel her dreams. But Elena's shadow loomed larger, a threat not just to her career, but to the love she and Preston had forged. What if Elena's ambition wasn't just professional? What if she wanted to reclaim Preston, to tear open old wounds? Umber's hand rested on her belly, a protective gesture, her heart pounding with a fierce resolve. She wouldn't let anyone, rival or ghost, steal what she'd built. Preston stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "Umber, whatever she's planning, we face it together. You're not alone in this." His eyes held hers, raw with a vulnerability she'd come to cherish. But doubt flickered, a whisper of fear that Elena's return could test their bond in ways they hadn't faced. Umber nodded, her jaw set. I know, she said, her voice steady, but I need to fight this my way. She's coming for my work, my name. I won't let her take it. Preston's hand brushed her cheek, a silent vow, but the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. The loft's warmth felt fragile now, the jazz a faint echo against the storm brewing beyond their walls. Umber closed her sketchbook, her designs a shield against the threat. She was no longer the assistant caught off guard. She was Umber Nkosi Caldwell, a creator whose fire had lit runways and hearts. But as she looked at Preston, his face etched with worry, she felt the weight of a new battle, one that could test their love, their trust, and the legacy they were building. Elena Voss was a shadow, but Umber's light was brighter. She'd face this storm, not just for herself, but for the family they'd become. Their unborn child, a beacon of hope in the gathering dark. Thank you for joining us on this electrifying journey through Umber and Preston's story and unseen spark. What did you think of their unexpected spark and the legacy they built together? Did Umber's triumph over doubt inspire you, or did Preston's vulnerability steal the show? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're tuning in from. Your voices fuel our storytelling. Subscribe to our channel to catch every new chapter of love, ambition, and drama, and share this story with friends who crave a tale that burns bright. We're so grateful for your support and can't wait to meet you again in our next video. Until then, keep shining, just like Umber.